Welcome back, everybody. This is Magic with Randy. I am Randy, and today we're going to be talking about the modern metagame and kind of how it has changed over the last 30 days, and what we can expect to see, what we can expect coming up in these new RCs that are happening this coming weekend. When you guys are watching this, we will have the European RC, we have the Canada RC, and we have the Brazil RC. So this is going to be a lot of data for us to go over involving what the modern meta game is going to look like for the paper portion of it. And then after that, we have the US's RCs coming up after that in February and March. For any of you who don't know, I am qualified for the March one, or I'm qualified for the US RC. I'm going to the March one in Charlotte. So clearly I've been paying attention to the meta game somewhat, trying to figure out what deck I'm going to be taking, finding out if I'm going to sell my soul to buy Mox Opals. But as always, guys, if you like what you're seeing, you like what I'm doing, go ahead and leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, it really helps me out, and let me know what you guys are thinking about playing in your RCs if you're going to one, or what you're playing in your RCQs for standard. Love to hear from you. So this is a 30-day out metagame for what was going on in Modern. Now, obviously, this is not perfect information by any sense of the imagination. This is MTG Goldfish. I'm not hiding where I'm getting this information from or anything like that. Nothing crazy. But this is, kind of what they broke it down to for the top 8, top 10 decks. So, to no one's surprise, Boros Energy was still dominating 30 days ago. It was, one of the least affected decks when it came to the bannings, in the sense of it did lose, Amp Raptor and the Ring, but everything else was still good, right? It didn't lose any solid pieces or anything to stop the deck from being playable by any means. Dimir Murktide obviously gained a big boost with the Ring being out of the metagame. Eldrazi Ramp was still doing relatively well, which is kind of surprising based off of, different things and things of that nature. Grinding Station is starting to picking up steam because Mox Opal made that deck ridiculously well. Belcher was still good because if Boros is good, Belcher's good. Ruby Storm picking up more speed. Amulet Titan was still kicking around. Yawgmoth kicking around. Mardu Energy, just Boros Energy adjacent, and the Orzhov mid-range deck was starting to pick up a little bit of steam and trying to get built and figured out. When we look back now compared to 7 days time frame of what's being most played, essentially, to no surprise, unfortunately, Boros Energy is still one of the most played decks. It's still putting up a lot of numbers in the RCs. In the challenges and things like that. It's still putting up more than enough copies than it should be. Eldrazi Ramp is really picking up a lot of steam. They're now playing Karn, Little Karn, so they're making that a little bit better for them as a whole. Murktide is still seeing a lot of play. No one's figured out an exact list for that yet. At all. Grinding Station has been picking up a huge amount of steam. Grinding Station is probably what is the best deck in the format moving forward, as it seems. Now, I'm not saying it's for sure the best deck. I'm not saying it can't be beaten by any stretch of the imagination, but it's definitely what people are considering to be the best deck and probably the strongest deck to be taking to one of the RCs. If you have Mox Opals, great. If not, I'm sure the black market's still accepting kidneys. You can still sell that in time to get your Mox Opals. Orzhov Midrange is a deck that has seen a lot of big boom. This deck kind of came out of nowhere. It wasn't really popular as a whole. It wasn't really well known, and it's kind of came up as the Boros Energy killer or the mid-range killer. It also has a good matchup against Eldrazi Ramp because it has ways to destroy the lands, kind of slow them down. Same thing with it has a good matchup against Belcher because it gets to destroy their lands type situation. So not too surprising to see that doing well. And then we have Belcher and Ruby Storm after that. Again, not too surprising. Both those decks are doing pretty well. Ruby Storm, I still think, is not good to take to a big tournament. It's good for these challenges, things like that, because you can do your opponents aren't expecting your deck. They don't have a deck list in front of them type situation. They're not mulliganing to their best hand against you in game one. So I think that Ruby Storm is a little bit better in these closed deck list type situations. Amulet Titan still has its cult following and still will do well. I'm sure in all of these RCs, Amulet Titan will put up at least one number into the top 8, probably 2 in the top 16, and we'll still hear from the Amulet Titan players how it's just a terrible deck and you shouldn't be playing it. Mardu Energy, still gets played. I think it's still worse than Boros Energy, and I think if you want to be the Mardu thing, you should just move to the Orzhov package, or the Orzhov mid-range deck instead. That's my personal opinion. Take that with whatever grain of salt you want to, and then Yawgmoth is still putting up numbers and doing, not terrible. It's still Yawgmoth. But kind of going over these main like 5 decks, 4 decks, essentially going into like Boros Energy. So last time that we were playing Boros Energy, or the last time Boros Energy was quote unquote the best deck of the format, we had the Ring, we had Ampharaptor. Obviously that has changed. Now all these deck lists I'm taking are just from the last challenge they played in and whatever the best position they were in that challenge. So these decks are not by any means 100% the best deck, or 100% the best build, or 100% what the sideboard is going to look at for any of the RCs going forward. Just kind of breaking it down, explaining what you can expect to see on these at these RCs. Obviously, anyone who is qualified for the RC knows these decks. They're already practicing against them or taking one of these probably. Obviously, there will be more than just these 5 decks at the RCs, like there is always. The standard, modern, Pioneer, doesn't matter. There's always the best decks or like the most popular decks, and then there's still fringe decks that still play and can do well. It's not like they're if you're not playing Boros Energy, you're losing the tournament, or Eldrazi Ramp, Dimir, Grinding Station, any of these decks. That being said, though, the biggest change here is we see Season Pyromancer has kind of been deemed as the card of choice for card advantage in these lists. Season Pyromancer was a card that saw a lot of play before the One Ring, and after the One Ring, basically it died. This card died because of One Ring and Jegantha. There wasn't really a reason to play this when you had Jegantha. Jegantha was already like kind of your answer for this, and the One Ring was your card advantage. So there's no reason to play Season Pyromancer. Now we're seeing Season Pyromancer all over the place. The numbers of Season Pyromancer also varies a lot. Obviously, this one's playing 2. I've seen 3 and 4 copies up there. I've seen 0 copies and doing something else. So I don't think there is like the best one figured out. But right now, I've seen like Season Pyromancer. Yeah. Now the best Fable the Mirror Breaker gets played as well, and the 4-mana one that escapes my name gets played. But we're seeing Season Pyromancer kind of coming in. We're still keeping the 4 Flages. We still have the 4 Johnny, 4 Ocelot, 4 Guided Souls. Ragavan's numbers are still waxing and waning. I've seen 2 copies, 3 copies. No one's playing 4 copies. I think everyone knows that 4 is the wrong number, but 2 to 3 copies seems to be the number. Same thing with the Shepherd. We're seeing somewhere between 1 and 3 copies. I see a lot of that. We're still playing the best removal spell they have. Galvanic Discharge. Threadman Charms in the main helps get rid of the get rid of the graveyard, so it helps against like the breach decks or any the thing dealing with the graveyard. Still a form of removal with dealing damage. The creature equal to twice the number of creatures you control, and then destroys an enchantment that doesn't really come up. Still have Static Prison, and Goblin Bombardment is probably one of the best cards for this deck. It's really weird how much you can make or break the game by whether or not your Goblin Bombardment either resolves or lives. This one's also playing 4 Fables. I think Fable is probably one of the best cards you can be playing in this deck. A lot of the decks haven't been playing Fable. I think this is probably where you want to be if you're going to be taking Boros Energy to any of the RCs or doing any of the RCQs, anything like that. This is definitely what I would be on is Fable in these decks. And then, they're playing 22 lands, still have the Arena of Glory, Elegant Parlors, a Mountain, Plains, and... Oh, it's Sacred Foundry. Okay, I just completely missed Sacred Foundry. Like, I know they play the Shockland. What am I doing? Okay, it's still playing the Shockland, and just some fetch lands to go along with it. Mostly all your fetch lands will have white, because you care about white the most. For being able to cast your spells. And then their sideboards, definitely Silence to help stop against the combo decks, Ghost Vacuum for more. Graveyard Hate, same thing with Surgical, Vexing Bauble, there for the Grinding Station matchup, Stolen Silence there for the Grinding Station matchup, Threadman Charm, Grinding Station matchup, as well as additional removal, Blood Moon because it's good against the mana decks, Wear Tear against anything people are throwing at you, and then Ascendant Charm all for the Eldrazi Ramp decks as well. So not too much of a surprise for this list by any means. I still think this is one of the best decks to be playing in the format. I definitely think this is going to be a large meta share when we look at the RC breakdowns of decks that were here for day 1. Now the day 2 metagame is going to be a little bit different. I don't necessarily think that Boros Energy is the best deck to play in the format. I think it's very good in a wide open field though. I think this is going to be kind of like our normal thing where we're going to see, the metagame probably be like 20%, maybe 15 at the lowest. At these RCs, we're going to see like 15, 20% Boros energy, and I think the day 2 metagame is going to be a lot more interesting on what percentage of that actually gets over. I think that it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be as good as people think it is. The deck is still very powerful. I do not want to underplay that by any stretch of the imagination. The deck is still extremely powerful. It has not gotten. It's not lost a lot of power, but I do think that everything that's going on in the metagame has changed a lot. I do think that this deck is not the best thing to be doing, but I think it is very strong. Now, I could be wrong. We could see a crazy amount of day 2s having Boros Energy. Boros Energy just kind of showcasing that, hey man, you should have banned something else in this deck as well. I could be wrong. We'll wait and see what happens, obviously. But as it stands, I definitely think this is going to transfer over into the RCs. We're going to see this be 15 to 20% of the metagames, for sure. Another deck here that's kind of been, I wouldn't say surprising, but like it has been doing really well, is this Eldrazi ramp deck. Now, so Eldrazi losing, or I should say any of the ramp decks losing the ring was a big hit for them, right? That was a big draw to them, being able to just recoup that card advantage very fast. So, or card disadvantage very fast, right? You had to play a bunch of things. You need to get that card synergy going. You need to have like that flow, that vagacity of drawing cards. So they lost that. That was a huge lose to them. Definitely something that you can't downplay enough. Losing that was a big deal for these decks. So they've kind of compromised and dealt some other things. So now we're playing Sowing Mycospawn. This card is amazing to get out early. You get out as early as turn 2 with this deck. More likely you're getting out turn 3, but you can get this out as early as turn 2. Immediately go get another, Eldrazi Temple. Just continuously mana ramping, getting up to your creatures. Playing Devourer of Destiny help set up your top deck early game, as well as this being a solid 7-drop for our Ugin's Labyrinth, as well as this isn't embarrassing to cast as well. Being able to exile a permanent that has one or more colors, always good. No Drifter here, so there's another 7-drop, and it's also an early play, being able to evoke it. Notably, this evoke does work with Eldrazi Tempo, so you can use Eldrazi Tempo plus a blue land. So you only need two lands technically to evoke it. That is kind of good if you are looking at picking up this deck or trying it out. Just kind of heads up on that. Not a lot of people would notice that or think about that. Same thing with World Breakers. It's one of these cards that does so much damage. If you can cast this out early, being able to hit your opponent's lands, slow them down. We have that with the Sowing Mycospawn, being able just to slow our opponents down, get them take them off their tempo, knock them down a land, knock them down a turn, always good. They're also both cast triggers, which makes it more annoying to deal with. And then we have Emrakul, the Promised End, is our way to kind of close out the game and just kind of like be the backbreaking to our opponent. And it is a little crazy, but this deck, because of it playing Malevolent Rumble, does have an easy time getting up to the 4 or 5 different card types. To make this card cost a lot less, you're never really paying 13 mana for it. You're usually paying somewhere between, what I want to say, probably like between 6 and 8 mana is what you're normally paying for this card, just depending on what you hit in your rumbles, what's going on, how like the game is type situation. But you can get this card relatively cheap. It's kind of surprising. The newest thing these decks have started implementing is Karn the Great Creator. It gives them that extra card advantage they were kind of missing. Also helps them against some of the combo decks as well, being able to start off Grinding Station and all their little artifacts, being able to start off Belcher. Those are kind of two of the big decks that this deck loses to. Now, that doesn't mean that this deck is doing super well, again, against these combo decks. They still do struggle against the combo decks as a whole, but Karn has definitely helped cement and make this deck a lot better than what it was. Excuse me. But outside of that, we're playing probably the most broken card printed in a while. This Kozilek's Command does a lot of work for not a lot of mana. Being able to, mana ramp, being able to exile a creature, being able to exile graveyards, being able to set up your top decks, just super powerful. It does all these things. It just kind of checks every box that you want it to. It's a removal spell, it's a graveyard hate spell, it's a ramp spell, and it's a draw spell. Plus setting up the top of your deck. Just a lot of value. Kind of the reason why you want to be Eldrazi. This is definitely the biggest draw to the Eldrazi deck. Same thing with, we have Rumble as another 2-drop play, help us mana ramp, get the best, permanent card from the top 4. Notably, the only only cards you can't hit in this deck are Kozilek's Command is the only card you can't hit off of the Rumble. Everything else is a permanent, whether it be planeswalkers, creatures, artifacts, or enchantments, or lands. And then, playing Kozilek's Return, because we just talked about, Boros Energy being one of the best decks. Being able to wipe them is a huge deal, not to mention when you cast your 7-drops, being able to cast your 7-drops and get this going. Also, a fun note, too, when you evoke Dual Drifter, that does count as the 7-drop for Kozilek's Return, so you can flash that back and deal 5 damage to each creature. It doesn't come up a lot, but it is notable that, you can do a good board wipe impression for essentially 3 mana. And then we're also playing 2 Talismans of Curiosity and Impulse, just kind of little mana ramps. They help you, when you go Ugin's Lament turn 1, play this on turn 1 as well. Now you're looking at, possibility of like 5 mana on turn 2, which lets us cast, Summoning Microspawn on turn 2, getting us to ramp faster, just being able to play our big spells. We're also playing Utopia Sprawl as another way to mana ramp. All our lands tap for green, or our forest, I should say. Well, most of our lands are forest. I should say, we're playing, so we can attach this onto it and then be able to start mana ramping, adding 2 mana. Just kind of another, like, quote unquote soul land that we get to play. And then for our lands, we're playing Bojuka Bog as a way to get nuke the graveyard. We can get that off of Summoning Microspawn. 1 Breeding Pool, 1 Cavern of Souls that we can get off of Microspawn. 1 Commercial District is a way to have a Surveil land. 4 Eldrazi Temples, 4 Forest, 1 Sanctum of Ugin, again something we can hit off of Microspawn, 1 Stomping Ground, 4 Ugin's Labyrinth, and 4 Windswept Thief as our way to fetch up these lands. And then obviously we are playing Karn, so we're playing Karn package. Now the Karn package has changed a little bit. I've seen some different things, like this one's running the Steering Bridge, only 1 Stone Brain, 2 Soulless Jailer, usually they're only running 1, 1 Disrupting Flute, 1 Liquid Metal Coating, and 1 Tomar's Crypt and 1 Engineered Explosives as our way to kind of, get advantage or take control of the board state that's going on. And then of course, we're running 3 Consigned Memory, because this card is essentially one of the best sideboard cards that you can run. Lithomancer's Barrage is a new one. I haven't seen this one in these lists before. Kind of good, helps you against killing Frog early, or killing problematic permanents from the Boros Energy list or from Orzhov. So, not too surprising. Also helps against Grinding Station 2, all their little early creatures. So, basically gets to kill anything that you're really worried about in the top 5 decks. And then 2 Dismembers as well, just good removal spell. And 1 more Kozilek's Return as a good board wipe spell against the Boros Energy deck. Not too surprising. But yeah, this deck has definitely been coming up and doing well, putting up a lot of numbers in these challenges. Not necessarily getting first or top 8 all the time, but still putting in the top 3 too. And if you're going to these RCs, you're aiming to get top 32, get into that Pro Tour, get that Pro Tour invite. That's what everyone's playing for, right? Now everybody wants first place, everyone wants top 8. There's obviously bigger prizes as you get higher up. But if you're going to these RCs and you can't tell me that you're going to be unhappy getting 32nd place, getting that invite to the Pro Tour. Like, that is a lot of Magic players' dreams, a lot of things that people don't get to do, right? It's still super hard to get onto the Pro Tour. That is a lot of what people are playing for in these RCs. And the biggest inclusion right now is that Karn the Great Creator has kind of made this deck do a lot better. When I first saw this deck, I kind of tried playing it out. It just wasn't feeling good. I saw people innovate more with it and play Karn the Great Creator. I played the list again, and it did feel a lot better. It gives you a lot more play with the deck. I definitely like having the idea of having another a bigger creature in the sideboard as well, whether it be like a One Coil Engine or a Cityscape Leveler. I think that's kind of what you need in these sideboards. That's just my personal opinion. I am not an Eldrazi aficionado. I'm not one of these ramp aficionados. I'm not saying I know better than anybody else that's playing the deck. That's just kind of how I felt when I was playtesting this list. It's not something, these aren't like the decks I usually play though, so I could be very wrong. But I do think that if you're looking to pick up this deck, looking to play it, I kind of like the idea of putting a Cityscape Leveler in the sideboard. That's just my personal opinion. It gets to deal with a lot of problematic permanents, as well as be kind of just like when you're dirtling around and draw a card, you have something kind of big to do with it, essentially. But but that's just, you know, my personal opinion on that. But I do think Karn was a great pickup for these decks, and almost surprising that these decks weren't playing Karn to begin with, just because it fits the big mana style so well. All right, on to Dimir Murktide. So this is a list that has, or I'm sorry, not this list, but this is a deck that's been doing well for a long time. There is no current best build. We've seen a lot of different things going on. You'll notice this list is more stock, I'm going to call it, where it's playing Counterspell. We've seen some lists not playing Counterspells. We've seen playing just like 2 Counterspells. We've seen them playing Thoughtseize, no Counterspells, a bunch of 1-mana interactions of like Spell Snare, Stern Scalding, Fatal Push idea instead of the Counterspells. Kind of been all over the place with this deck. I've seen a lot of different things going on with it. I do think this is one of the best decks to take when you have an open deck list type deck, though, or type tournament, not deck, sorry. Because it has so much play and give, right? If you know you're up against like a combo deck, like, all right, cool, I'm going to mulligan to where I have a couple counter spells, slow them down, then I can just need to stick like a Frog or an Oculus some point in time in the game and take it out. Or like if you know you're up against, you know, Boros Energy, like, okay, I need removal spells, I need a fast Frog, I need a fast Oculus, something like that, to where I can start taking control of the board state and putting them on the back foot. So, you know, it gives you those options where you can do whatever you need to, right? You can mulligan correctly, you can, you know, when you're considering on turn 1, you know what you're looking for. You know if Force of Negation is bad, you know if it's good type situation. So all these kind of things go into it. So it does make this deck more appealing if you're looking at it for like an open deck list type tournament, as to where a closed deck list tournament, you know, you can keep a hand that has, you know, a little bit slower and has a couple of removal spells, things like that, and you play against Belcher and you're like, cool, this hand's trash. These removal spells against for their creatures that don't exist don't help me type situation. Whereas, you know, if it's open deck list, you're like, oh, okay, cool, this hand's really good at removing creatures. Yeah, ship that. We don't need that. We need to get some counter spells in here. You know, so I do think this is probably one of the decks that will be probably one of the most played decks in the tournament. I think it's going to be right behind Boros Energy, or if it's not behind Boros Energy, it'll be in 3rd place. The big thing I don't know is how big Grinding Station is going to be. And I say that mainly because Mox Opals are a legitimate cost restriction to that deck. And I'll get to that here in a second when I talk about the Grinding Station. But I do think Dimir Murktide is going to be one of those decks that is probably either the 2nd or 3rd most played deck in all these RCs, just because it's such a good deck to take to an open deck list tournament. That being said, going over the deck has not changed too much. Obviously, this is not the end-all be-all build. Like I was saying, I'm just taking the decks, the build from the latest challenge where they did the best at, or not where they did, what deck did the best in the last challenge for this video. And Dimir Murktide continuously changes. You can click on all these 5.0 deck lists, and they will all be some different combination. So you're not going to see, you know, the same build twice almost. And that's just because people have different play styles, they have different things they want or don't want. Like, for example, I mean, this is pretty stock. The 4 second Frogs, 4 Oculus is pretty stock in these decks. This is running 3 Murktide Regents. Usually 2 is the stock number. So that's already different in this list. This one's running 2 Considers, 4 Fatal Push, obviously the best removal spell in black. Right now, 3 Spell Snares, 2 Stern Scaldings, 1 Surgical Extraction, 4 Thought Scour, 4 Unearth. Obviously, you're going to see almost 4 Unearth almost always because it goes along with the Second Frog Oculus plan. 4 counter spells, which again isn't always the case. 1 Drown Lock. I haven't seen this honestly that much, so that's a little outside. Shoot the Sheriff has kind of become a staple as the removal spell choice. 2 Force Negation, 1 Mystical Dispute is definitely out there. I haven't seen that at all in the main deck. 2 Sinking the Supers, that seems to be pretty common. We've seen 2, 3. 2 to 3 is what I've seen the most of, and then playing 18 lands, basically just playing, you know, 1 Swamp, 2 Undersea Sewers, 2 Watery Graves, 2 Island, as kind of like your fetchable lands, essentially. And then, so this sideboard, we're running, you know, 200 Explosives. That's a little more than I've seen. Usually it's only about 1 copy. 3 Consigned Memories. I still think that you want 4 Consigned Memories in this list. Consigned Memories is just really good, and if we expect Eldrazi Ramp to be big, that's always good. It helps against Grinding Station as well, and it helps against Belcher as well. 3 Nail Spellbombs. Usually you see 2 to 3, so not too crazy. Stern Scalding, sometimes in the sideboard, sometimes isn't. Shoot the Sheriff, I don't usually see that in the sideboard, so that's a little different. 1 Brazen Borrower, again, I don't usually see that in the sideboard, so always a little different. 2 Harbinger of the Seas, pretty stock, and 2 Mystical Disputes, usually pretty stock. We see 2 or 3 of those as well. But obviously we're running our third one in the main deck already. So nothing too crazy here. I do think, like I said, this is going to be a pretty popular deck going into the RCs. I expect if you're watching in the RCs, live stream or anything like that, we're going to see this deck on camera a lot, just because of the pure number of people that are going to be bringing it. This deck has a pretty good matchup, in my opinion, against a lot of the best decks. It can beat the Boros Energy deck. It's not the greatest. I think that's closer to 50-50, maybe 60-40 in Energy's favor. But I think if you're a good player, you know how to play the matchup, and in an open deck list where you're able to mulligan kind of aggressively to have your removal spells, have your early Oculus type things, put Boros Energy in a position where they have to have these answers. You can definitely put them on the back foot. Against Grinding Station, I think you can beat them just based off of your sideboard hate you're going to have, plus the main deck, having 3 spell snares, being able to stop their early interaction, stop their comboing off. You still can lose to that, obviously. Orzhov mid-range does feel a little terrible with this deck, just because they're so good at grinding, but I think you can beat them, but I do think that's probably one of your worst matchups. And Eldrazi Ramp, I think, can be hard. It just depends on how fast they're getting their stuff out, what they're casting early, essentially. Obviously, the Consigned Memories help. I do think you kind of want 4 Consigned Memories just for that matchup alone, but that's just my personal opinion off of what I've played for Dimir Murktide. Alright, going on to what a lot of people are considering probably the best deck in the format, and it's definitely been putting up a lot of numbers to suggest that as well. This is the Grinding Station deck. So for anyone not familiar with this deck or doesn't understand how this deck wins or anything like that, just quickly going over it, this deck plays Mox Amber, Mox Opal as ways to generate mana. It plays Grinding Station, which is a 2-mana artifact. You can tap, sacrifice an artifact, target player puts top 3 cards of his or her library into the graveyard, and then whenever an artifact comes into play, you may untap the Grinding Station. Then you play Underworld Breach, which, so for 1 in a red, enchantment, each non-land card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost, plus exiling 3 other cards from your graveyard. Then you, at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice Underworld Breach. So, our win con here is Thassa's Oracle. So Thassa's Oracle is 2 blue for a 1/3. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is your devotion to blue. Put up to one of those on top of your library, and then the rest of them in the bottom of the library in random order. And if X is greater than or equal to the number of cards in your library, you win the game. So our goal is to set up having enough artifacts to activate Mox Opal, plus Underworld Breach and Grinding Station. So Grinding Station we're gonna tap. We're gonna tap our Mox Opal for blue. We're gonna tap Grinding Station, sacrifice Mox Opal. We're gonna mill 3 cards in our graveyard. We're gonna have Underworld Breach going, so we can exile 3 cards in our graveyard. Put recast Mox Opal. Recasting Mox Opal untaps Grinding Station. Grinding Station untaps. We tap Mox Opal for blue. We repeat this process until we mill over our entire deck and can cast Thassa's Oracle from our graveyard. So, because even if you kill Thassa's Oracle on the spot and we have no other devotion to blue, our deck will be 0, our devotion to blue will be 0. That is greater than or equal to the number of cards in our library, we win the game. That is the way this deck essentially wins as a whole. Now, this version is splashing white. This isn't always the case with these decks. They aren't always splashing white. A lot of them are usually the stat teamer or rug color, red, green, blue. This one was splashing white for Teferi, Reclamation, and Prismatic Ending. So, but pretty normal what we're seeing here with the 1 Haywire Mite in the main, 4 Tamiyo, 1 Thassa's Oracle, 4 Embree to be able to recast our artifact, as well as put 4 cards into our graveyard, 1 Teferi to kind of stop interaction with us, 2 Preordain, 1 Prismatic Ending, 4 Rumble. This is a big card that the deck got to pick up. Being able to mill 4 cards and put a permanent into our hand. Notably, you also notice that the only non-permanent we have is either another Rumbles or the Reclamation, and we have a flashback on the Reclamation, so we're not even worried about that going into the graveyard. We're also playing Mistress Bauble, Mox Amber, Mox Opal. Portable Hole is a way to interact with our opponent's creatures and problematic permanent spells that are 2 or less. 1 Soul Guide Lantern and 3 Grinding Stations and 4 Underworld Breach. We are also an Urza Saga deck too. We can go get our Mox Opals, we can go get our Soul Guide Lantern for hate, our Haywire Mite for anti-hate, things like that. We can also just beat down with Urza Saga tokens as well, thanks to Tamiyo making a bunch of clues essentially as well. This deck does kind of fight on a couple of different axes, which kind of makes it harder for the deck to just like straight up lose or for you to straight up beat it. Now, obviously, game one's a lot easier just to beat the deck. If you can, exile their Thassa's Oracle, it makes it a lot harder for them to win. They have to do it the fair way, quote unquote, by making a bunch of Urza Saga tokens, which can be a lot more challenging for this deck to actually go off and win through combat damage as a whole. So we have that, and then in the sideboard we have a second win con here with Jace Wielder's Mystery. So if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. Target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into the graveyard, draw a card, and then -8, draw 7, and if your library has no cards in it, you win the game. So nothing too crazy there. Just under their Thassa's Oracle, essentially, that is a different card name. But they are playing the 3 Consigned Memories for the Eldrazi Ramp deck, as well as the other. There's some other spells they're playing that for too, but that's a big one. Nature's Claim for anti-hate. Form's Chant to be able to stop your opponent from interacting with you when you go off. Pithing Needle as a way to interact with different chromatic permanents. Prismatic Ending is just a good removal spell. Spell Pierce for good interruption. Spell Snare, same thing. Pyroclasm there, definitely for the Boros Energy matchup. One Teferi Time Grabber, again, just for interaction. Things like that to stop interaction, really. But this is what is considered essentially the best deck right now in Modern. This is a deck that I think will do extremely well when it comes to these RCs. I don't know how many people are going to be actually on this deck, and the reason why I say that is it is hard to to buy into this deck, essentially. The average person who doesn't have Mox Opal isn't easily dropping $700 for Mox Opal. I say this as an average Magic player. If I had access to Mox Opal, I'd probably be testing the hell out of this deck. This is probably the deck I could would be playing. I can justify dropping $200 on Tamiyo's. I can't justify dropping $900 on a playset of Tamiyo's and Mox Opals. That is pretty much the only thing I'm missing from this list. So it's kind of hard for me to justify dropping all that kind of money on these decks. I guess I would also drop another $100 for grinding stations because I don't own those. So, but it is a very expensive deck in paper. It is very hard to get a hold of as a whole. So I definitely can see how this might be restrictive to some Magic players or a good majority of Magic players when it comes to trying to justify kind of buying these things. Now, obviously, grinders, people who have access to people who own these cards, things like that, will probably end up playing this deck. I think this deck will still see play. I think it will still be probably about 5. I'm going to say somewhere between 5 and 8% of the meta when we look at these RCs and kind of break them down, just because it is that powerful of a deck. The real question would be to see if it's not going to get hated out, because obviously people know this deck is coming. People are kind of preparing for this deck. People are trying to have the best answers they can to this deck. It'll be interesting to see what happens when it comes to that type of situation and what all boils down to. And it'll be interesting to see if the Grinding Station decks don't maybe cannibalize themselves on trying to perfect their perfect combo and just losing to Boros Energy just beating them down in the face type situation. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, but I do think this is going to be one of the best decks you can take to any of these RCs. It's just the pure power level of it. I've literally lost from just board states where they had nothing and top decked Underworld Breach and won based off of just that alone. The deck is very powerful, and there's not a lot of graveyard hate actually running around. I think that's the biggest problem. If it's like there was a lot of green lists running around where they were playing Endurance. If Endurance was way more popular, way more playable in the metagame right now, I definitely think Grinding Station would see a lot less play, just because losing your graveyard, like when you go to cast Underworld Breach and they go, okay, cool, in response, I'm going to shuffle your graveyard into your deck. You can have Underworld Breach, it does nothing for you. Like just being able to stop these like top deck, we're like, oh, they're kind of in a bad position. Oh, top decked Underworld Breach, just get to win off of that. I do think it'll be interesting too to see if this is what gets Mox Opal rebanned, or possibly just Underworld Breach gets banned and Mox Opal gets to stay around. Be interesting to see what happens there. And then, oops, get out of here. Going on to Orzhov Midrange. This is a deck that essentially came out of nowhere. It wasn't really seeing play for the longest time, and now it's considered one of the top 5 decks in the format right now, or at least it's being played as one of the top 5 decks. So it is essentially what people have been calling Death and Taxes, despite the fact that it has no taxing elements in it at all, besides it plays Flickerless. It is not a tax deck in my opinion. It is much more of just, it kind of screams Orzhov Midrange in my opinion. I'm sure people will hate me for saying that, but that is how I feel about the deck as a whole. So the biggest thing that kind of came about here was that we have Overlord of the Balemark, which is a 5 mana enchantment creature horror, has impending for 1 in the black and 5. When it enters or attacks, you mill 4 cards. Then you can return a non-avatar creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. So the super good thing to do with this is, impending it, and then we're playing 4 of the Shepherd, so we can use, when we attack with the Shepherd, we can bounce or flicker the Bismarck, the Overlord. It comes back into play, you get another trigger off of it. Now you also have, a 5 mana 5/5 that's attacking next turn. You're also putting a +1/+1 counter on your Shepherd, making him the bestest of boys. This is kind of like the whole thing came about. And then you also have Flicker Wisps as well as a way to, flicker this, get more value from it, essentially. We're also playing, Emperor of Bones, being able just to eat graveyard hate, have some graveyard hate in the main deck, as well as just, eating our own creatures to then adapt and do shenanigans with it. Same thing like where if you adapt this and get an Overlord, you're going to get the trigger from it coming into play, triggering it from it attacking, and then if you flicker it, you're still going to get it. You're not going to have to worry about getting exiled from the adapt trigger of this. 2 Bowmasters, because it is a good card as a whole, but it's not super good right now. People aren't drawing a lot of extra cards, but it is nice against Boros Energy, being able to hit their X1s. 4 of Shepherd, we just talked about why this is good. 1 White Orchard Phantom. This is good against like the big mana ramp decks, things like that. That's why you see 3 more in the sideboard. Not super good in game 1, but it's good if you know you're going to be playing against Eldrazi Ramp. Aven Interrupter, I apologize, I guess this is a taxing effect. Being able to interact with your opponent, kind of stop them from doing what they're doing. Notably, if you, hit this on a counterspell, it just makes counterspell a dead card for the end of the time. 1 Boggart Troller, this is a way to exile our opponent's graveyard. Flicker Wisp, we just talked about why this is good. We also have Recruiter the Guard, which is really good to flicker. Kind of nice to see this card finally start to see play or find a home at least. This was a card that I was wondering if was ever going to see any actual play. Super powerful card in Legacy. Hasn't really been seeing the play though in Modern until now. 1 Skyclave Apparition, good just removal for any kind of 4 mana permanent, basically. Witch Enchanter, also good against your opponents. Being able to destroy artifacts. We just talked about, Grinding Station being one of the best decks in the format. That's super huge. Notably too, because this says up to non-land. So if you Flicker Wisp, Boggart Troller wins a land, or Witch Enchanter wins a land, it will come back as that 2/2. Get some extra value there. Also playing, we're playing the 4 Overlords, 4 Solitudes, great removal spell. Playing the Ephemerate as well. We have a bunch of stuff that we just talked about. It's good with flickering, and 4 Fatal Push as well, because kind of one of the best removal spells in black. And 2025, we have Aether Vial seeing play as a 4 of in Modern. It is a wild time indeed, folks, to see Aether Vial seeing play like this. And then, we're playing, 2 Courtyards, 2 Shrines, 3 Plains, 2 of the Surveil lands, and 1 Swamp, and then a couple of fetch lands to go along with it. Overall, this deck is very good. It does a good job of beating up like Boros Energy. It's just a better creature deck. It can outvalue them to the extreme. It kind of has a little bit of an issue with, Grinding Station, like the combo decks, and Eldrazi Ramp. Eldrazi Ramp is kind of 50-50. It depends on how fast they get it out. If you have that Orchard game 1, or the Orchard Phantom game 1, you can definitely just kind of destroy what they're doing. If you don't have that, they can kind of run over you game 1. That's why you have, 3 of them in the sideboard for game 2. Just remembering, Thoughtseize as interaction, Rest in Peace to stop the graveyard, Sanctifier Evect as another way to stop the graveyard. Really good against like the Boros Energy list. Sony Silence for the artifacts. Wrath of Skies, obviously a good one. Aven Interrupter, another way to interrupt. Fairy Macabre, another way to interrupt the graveyard that you can also search off of Recruiter the Guard. And 1 Plague Engineer as a way against Boros Energy, being able to name cats and not have to worry about anything they're doing with their cat tokens and things like that. Notably, it will help automatically trigger a Ajani, but when Ajani's making 101 tokens, it doesn't, or sorry, 100 tokens, it doesn't really matter. He's not getting any super value from that. But overall, I think this deck is very well. I think it is a powerful deck. It'll be interesting to see what kind of percentage actually shows up to the tournament. I think the biggest problem with this deck is the mirror matches are kind of horrendous because you're super grindy. Your game 1 can go super long, And if you're trying to play in, a 9-round tournament, that can be very taxing if you expect to play a lot of mirror matches, things like that. Same things with the Dimir matchup. It is kind of grindy, kind of long. It can be kind of hard to play against. If you're going to be playing a taxing deck for 9 rounds, that is a lot to take into consideration. So it'll be interesting to see how many people play this deck, how well it does in day 2. I'm going to guess it's still going to be a good portion of the meta, and it's a relatively cheap deck when you're talking about Modern as a whole. So anybody who was worried about budget constraints or anything like that with the bannings, things like that, this is probably the perfect deck to pick up. Not that I think budget plays a huge role when it comes into the RCs. I do think though Max Opals being $700 for a playset is a little steep for a lot of players who are especially worried about, if they don't do well at this tournament, is that going to be a good investment, or Max Opals is going to turn around and get banned here in 2 months because they're breaking the format type situation. I do think that plays a little bit more role into it, but I do think this is a very powerful deck to take as a whole. And then I kind of want to talk about Belcher, because I think it's a little slept on as a whole. And I guess kind of what I mean by that is I think that this deck is actually very well positioned against most of the game, or most of the decks in the format. If we think that Boros Energy is going to be a huge part of all the RCs, Belcher was kind of built to prey upon Belcher. Belcher was kind of built to prey upon Boros Energy. And if it's going to prey upon Boros Energy, this is the best time to do it. It still has a great game 1 matchup against them. And your game 2 and 3 isn't horrendous by any stretch of the imagination. So being able to have a good matchup there, you're not terrible against the Eldrazi Ramp deck. Your worst problem against Eldrazi Ramp is just Karn. So if you have a way to answer Karn or interact with Karn or stop Karn, you can still overrun them there. Dimir Murktide is a lot more grindy back and forth, but you can definitely, just get to a position where you have more counterspells than they have counterspells and win. Grinding Station's a little bit harder. You do have a lot of counterspells though for the interaction game 1. You can kind of steal game 1 and have to fight game 2 and 3. Orzhov Midrange is a little bit tougher of a matchup as a whole. If they're only going to be playing 1 Phantom, it does make it easier because they can't destroy all your lands. So that makes it a little bit more palatable, if you will. But the Phantom does definitely hurt this deck a lot. But, this deck hasn't really changed all that much. We're still playing, 4 Archaeologists, 4 Thundertrap Trainer to be able to dig and find our spells and lands. So we're playing 4 Specimen. That's just a flip land that deals, that's just one of the shock lands, essentially. Or, the bolt lands, It's a land that comes into play untapped for 3 life. Tameshi is up to 4. This is just one of the best cards in the deck, being able to generate so much mana and be able to hard cast, Goblin Charbelcher, or even do Word of Invention for Goblin Charbelcher and activate in the same turn. Do a lot of crazy things with this. This list is playing 1 Into the Floodmaw, just a good overall answer to anything your opponent might be playing. 3 Spell Snares, because we've learned that Spell Snare is just a heck of a card. 4 Baleen Veil. The give your creatures -2/-0 on a turn does come up every now and then, especially against Boros Energy. They have a super fast start. You don't, but otherwise it's just a land. Disrupting Soul, probably the best counterspell we can be playing, just because we can, interact. We have a bunch of 2s, we have some 1s, we have some 3s, we even have a 4. So just, good there. Jwari Disruption, mainly just here for a land. Every now and then the spike, the Force Spike comes up as a counterspell. Flare Denial, super good. Being able to sacrifice our Archaeologist and Thundertrap Trainer, awesome. Sinking the Super, great, great interactive spell as well as being a land. Word of Invention, obviously, great. We can go get our Lotus Bloom for 3 mana, or our Goblin Shellbelcher, and just kind of mana ramp us super hard. 1 Waterlogged Teachings is kind of here just as a it can do something card, but is also just another land. Force Suppression Race is really because it's a white land, so it helps with activating Tameshi's white X cost. And then Forcing Restoration is definitely here as a land. Every now and then you'll cast the front half, but usually you're in a dire desperation when you're in that situation. And of course we're playing 4 Lotus Blooms and 4 Goblin Charbelchers. This deck is very well game 1 against a lot of the decks in the meta. You have good game against the Grinding Station, you have good game against Eldrazi Ramp, you have good game against Boros Energy, Dimir, and Grinding Station. Eldrazi Ramp can be a little tough, same thing with Orzhov Midrange, but you're also just kind of good against a lot of things in game 1. You're kind of like the dredge of the format, where you just kind of can almost always win game 1, especially in an open deck list. You're going to know what you're up against, and not a lot of decks have interaction for this game 1. Their interaction is, I'm going to try to beat you before you can cast Goblin Charbelcher. you can usually win those games because you're just, you're countering their 2-drops, you're countering their 3-drop type situation. You're just putting yourself in a good position essentially as a whole. Or your 1/4 0-3s are just blocking them, slowing them down. They're not getting enough damage through. In our sideboard here, we have 1 Pact Negation, 3 Consigned Memories, 2 Into the Flood Malls, 1 Portable Hole, 2 Unable to Scream, 3 Harbingers, and 3 Mystic Disputes. Super good cards. Nothing too crazy to talk about. Unable to Scream, Into the Flood Malls, good for problematic creatures and bouncing problematic permanents. Same thing with Portable Hole, also searchable with the Word of Invention. Pact Negation there for when you need to just make sure you're winning the counter war and winning that turn. Consigned Memory, super good against the Eldrazi matchup. Harbinger, good against the big mana decks, things like that. Just making them lock down. Also, all our lands now don't hurt us when they come into play and come into play untapped. And Mystical Dispute there for the Dimir Murktide matchup as well. Just more counter spells. I think this deck is going to be really well positioned going into the RCs. I'm curious to see if that's going to translate when we watch the European RC, Canada RC, and Brazil RC this coming weekend. Be interesting to see, but this is kind of like the breakdown of what we can expect to see going into these RCs coming up here just this weekend. It's kind of like my hot take and my takeaway from it. I think that Boros Energy is still going to end up being about 20% of the metagame. I think that Grinding Station is probably going to be between 5 and 10% of the metagame. Eldrazi Ramp, I'm putting probably at 10, probably 10, maybe 12% max of the metagame, and I think Dimir Murktide is going to be probably about another 15% of the metagame, and then Orzhov Midrange is probably going to be about 5%, 5 to 10, like Grinding Station, depending on how much popularity it's really picked up. I think Belcher is not going to be super heavily played. I think maybe we'll see 5%, maybe less of Belcher, but I think it's super well positioned going into these RCs. Obviously, we'll find out, if I'm right or wrong. Let me know what your guys' predictions are for what you think, percentage-wise decks will be going into the RC tournament. And as always, guys, if you like what you're seeing, like what I'm doing, go ahead and leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And I'll catch you guys next time.